Good evening, and welcome to all of those individuals that are watching the replay. And I am so excited to come to you with another episode of Using Play to Improve Writing. Real quick, I want to make sure that I'm sharing into my home group, so hold on a second. Let's see if I can do this. It should still be going, even though I can't see it. And starting up here, here it is, awesome. And I'm going to share into my homeschooling hub. So any of you that aren't in my group, I would love to have you join me. The link is in the description of your page. And we are addressing, really we're learning about learning together. And it's so important that we continue to learn about learning as homeschool parents because, well, unless you have extensive training as a teacher, this is it, and your child really needs you to understand how they learn and what learning is all about. And so I'm excited to be a part of your journey, and I hope that if tonight is helpful, feel free to go back and watch all the other episodes that might be relevant for your child. So with that, for those who don't know me or don't know me well, I'm Jill Wolf, Learning Specialist, and I help homeschool parents to plan meaningful learning experiences in order to awaken the learning. And it's so important that we have awakened learners, especially in the 21st century. Our young people need to understand what it means to learn, and how do they learn. And so part of awakening them is really connecting learning to who they are and what they enjoy. And so I'm doing a whole series on using play to improve writing. And tonight, I believe is episode 12. I gotta always double check my numbers, but we're getting up there. And we're focusing on sewing. And that was really, some of these are kind of a stretch. How do I link sewing to writing? And so I have a couple different ideas for you tonight. Hey, Karen. I love that you show up so regularly. I do appreciate that. Okay, so sewing, if any of you have done any sewing yourself, you know that when you first learn to sew, you're following a pattern. And there is step by step of how to make whatever it is you're making, whether it's doll clothes or a skirt. I remember I started, let's see, I think I was in like 5th or 6th grade. And there was a lady at our church that loved to sew and offered a little like sewing instruction to the young girls in the church during the summer. And so my mom kind of signed me up to work with her. And I went over, and she had this big backyard and this big, almost like a tent, tarp, something. And it was over, and underneath were these huge long tables and sewing machines. So we got to do it all outside. It was really fun. But we'd lay the material out on this big table and the pattern, and then follow this. And sewing from a pattern is very specific. Reading procedural text. And I'll tell you what, procedural text is not as near as easy to just read as some people think it is. They think, oh, you put A and B, you cut A, you do C. But in step-by-step format, being able to follow the specifics of what the person who wrote this is trying to communicate to me, how to do this so I can replicate what I make to look just like what they've made. And that's really tough. It's tough to write, and it's very tough sometimes to read. When she says cut on the fold, does that mean actually cut down the fold? Does that mean lay my pattern on the fold? So there are some bits of jargon and vocabulary and phrases and things in sewing that's in that procedural text that you learn usually when you're first learning to sew. And then depending on how much you sew, you may or may not begin to have this kind of, I want to make something for my doll, or I want to make something for my doll house, or some area I'm playing, or something for my room, or a pillow for my bed, or maybe I want to make a dress, or I want to try something different. And perhaps you don't have an exact pattern. Perhaps you want to try to make it yourself. So now you have the issue of design. And I tell you, in the 21st century, for your child to be developing design skills and understanding is fantastic. So if it happens to be through sewing, let it be. But they designed something. So I know what you're thinking. Following a procedure and making something from a pattern or designing something, how does this lead to writing? And I'll tell you, here's a couple things. So let's go back to the one where they follow a pattern. One thing they could do is edit the pattern directions. Now, you're not sending this to anybody. It's not going, so this person who wrote it isn't going to ever know, nor are they going to feel awkward about it. But your child gets a chance to be in the editor's shoes. You're always the one editing their papers. You're the one that might catch spelling errors or that are suggesting different word choice or giving feedback on how to change this paragraph. And now let them do it. So they're looking at these directions and they've just made this, whatever it is, a skirt or a dress, and they've just made it, and have them go back to the directions and see what would they change of the directions if they were going to be sending this on for somebody else to make. What wasn't clear to them? What would they maybe add parentheses and a couple notes? But what would they change about it? So let them edit. And then that's one type. So it's called editing. So let me write these up here. Sorry. So if you do a follow the pattern, so experience, then one of the things that you can do from it is edit the directions. Directions. I can spell and write leaning backwards. But this is really powerful. Again, being able to edit your own work can be emotional because you are attached to what you just wrote. But editing something someone else wrote isn't near the emotional or personal feelings involved. So they might go, oh my gosh, when I read this direction, I did it wrong because I thought this and they said this and they meant this. So here's what I would change. Go for it. Have them actually change and revise it right in there. So I'm going to put edit/revise. If there's spelling errors or grammar errors, that's editing. If they're actually changing sentences or directions, that's revising. But anyway, have them go through and make those changes. Another thing you can do is just some reflection. And the reflection could be on how did your sewing skills grow? What did you learn to do with this particular pattern and sewing experience that you didn't know how to do before? You had to put in a zipper. Okay, so first you've identified what it was that was new. Now talk about what are some, maybe it could be just the feelings, or it could also be some notes for yourself of, when I do a zipper next time, here's what I'm going to do. Some notes for yourself about doing those things. I chose a zipper. I thought it'd be easier than buttons, but maybe I want to try buttons next time. Even though buttonholes look really hard, I think that, I want to widen the skills that I have within sewing. Before I kind of just, the hem of the dress, I just rolled up and stitched. This time I actually folded up and I had someone wear it and we pinned it. Okay, so whatever it was that they did that was new, whatever it was hard. So reflection could get at what was new, what was hard, what was easier. So now that you've done 3 of these, what was easier this time than before? Okay, so you're getting them to do some writing about reflecting on this following the pattern experience. Okay, you could also have them just do some kind of explain of how they're going to use this or why they made it. So some explain why you made this. So I'll let you in on a little secret. I guess it's not really a secret, but my sophomore year in college, well, every year in college we had this spring banquet. In my sophomore year, I decided I was going to make my dress, and it was a formal. And I don't know why I decided I wanted to do this. I think there's a little part of me that wanted, actually, I do remember why. I wanted to impress my boyfriend at the time that I had these homemaker skills, and his mom was an amazing sewer. And so I thought if I could make my dress and claim that would score me points in his eyes. Oh my goodness, the crazy things we do at Ladies, huh? He wasn't even a great guy, but whatever. So live and learn. But I made this dress, and it had off the shoulder kind of sleeves. It had this bodice and then a full skirt. I'm telling you, I worked hard on that thing. I followed a pattern, but there were so many different pieces and curves in the way things fit. So that brings me to my next one, design. So one cool thing about sewing is it's three-dimensional. Most other crafts that you do, even drawing, is two-dimensional. Even if I'm trying to create a three-dimensional look, like I used to do these things. I used to do some scrapbooking, and so I had these double-sided foam stickers, but they were thick. They were like that thick with sticky on both sides. So when you stuck something onto something else, it jumped off the page. It was like 3D. And you've got these puffy stickers, and those are 3D. If I'm drawing something, I'm trying to make this person look 3D, perhaps. Okay, but it's still on a flat surface. Sewing is for a three-dimensional person or doll or something that you're wearing. If you're making a bedspread or pillows or things like that, you may not have as much of this. But if you're making any kinds of clothing, it's three-dimensional, and this is really different. You can't just draw the outline of a shirt and cut two of them and sew them together. And trust me, I tried that. It doesn't work so well. So the one thing about design type of sewing experiences is that you get to address the three-dimensional piece of it. How do I make this for a person with curves? How do I make this for, you've got this round, and I've got my shoulder, and my shoulders need to move. So designing any kind of clothes or costumes brings in a whole new level of understanding the body and how to draw this out. So one of the interesting things is a pattern. Do you make a pattern? Okay, let me do a different color so we can see the show up. Now, I know you're thinking, but that's not writing. But in a way it is. Remember, and I say this each time in case this is your first time seeing it, writing isn't just words. Writing is the writer communicating what they understand to an audience. And that may be through visualizations, graphics. In this case, it's in a pattern. And patterns are flat. And your fabric is flat. So how is it that I'm going to make this two-dimensional fabric and pattern work on a three-dimensional body? And so that kind of spatial work is also really good for your child. So design involves having to think about that stuff. See, if you follow a pattern, they've already taken all that into consideration, and that's already in the pattern. But if you're designing, you've got to create some of that, or you've got to account for that. When I do a sleeve and I'm going all the way around the arm, is it one piece? Are there going to be, now I have to add, is there, I totally lost the word. When you sew two pieces together. Oh my goodness. Anyway, a seam, when you have a seam. And so there's a little bit of fabric on either side of that seam. So when I go to create a pattern, it has to be a little bit more than just the width of my arm. So designing any kind of clothing for a person or even a doll and creating a pattern is a big step of representing what I understand about the shape of what I'm making and how to represent that on this piece of paper. So that's the beginning of writing in sewing. from a design type of experience. Then I get into the directions. Now, they're just making something for their doll. They're like, what do I have to write directions for? So, okay, I want you to pretend that whatever you're creating, somebody else is going to want to make. So what are the directions on how to do it? And what comes first? What comes second? What comes third? What's interchangeable? What's not in terms of sequence? Sequence is huge in sewing, right? I sew the wrong two things first, and all of a sudden I don't have any armhole, right? So design has these steps. And this is procedural text. I know I keep coming back to saying procedural text. It's a type of informational text form. It's type of so there's three main forms: persuasive, informational, and narrative, which is story. And underneath informational, one kind is procedural. And so understanding how procedural text really works is involves both reading and writing it. So if they're reading it up here to follow a pattern, now they're writing it. They can even pull out old patterns for what's the language they use as they're describing this. Great, now they've got a resource, they're starting to bring in the language, and they're writing the directions to do a design like this. All right, so here's where I'm gonna throw something at you that's kind of different. Because it's three-dimensional, in storytelling, we want our characters to be three-dimensional. We don't want them to be flat. And that's metaphorical. And so that jump from three-dimensional actually here to the idea of three-dimensional character metaphorically, you can do if I'm making something for a specific person. So if you're making a little dress for your doll, I want you to think about what character traits about your doll are reflected in the outfit that you're making for them. Why make this for this doll and not for this doll? Why would this work on that one? What about who they are as a doll? If you're making something for your grandma, or you're making something for mom, or even for yourself, if you want to design for a particular character, if you're a little older, you could do costuming. And so when you're doing costumes, I had the really fun opportunity to make costumes for a number of different shows that I did through a bunch of different camps over time. And each time I had to ask myself, what about this person is represented in what they're wearing? How is it that their clothes and the style and the design of them represent who they are? So it builds out something very visual as I'm, as an audience seeing a character. So you could set up that as the challenge. You enjoy sewing? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to pick a character from, I did Harry Potter last week and I got my Harry Potter chart right here in front of me. So maybe one of the Harry Potter characters is going to a dance, or the Star Wars series franchise has all sorts of things. In fact, here's a story I want to share. I've been watching the making of all the Star Wars. I'm a Star Wars junkie. So I think in June, Star Wars might show up as one of our themes for an episode. But anyway, one of the things that I like watching is how they made it. And the most recent one was directed by Rian Johnson. And he has the scene, if you haven't seen the movie yet, this isn't going to make any sense, but they have the scene in this casino. But it's supposed to be a casino on an alien planet with all these different alien-y like creatures there. But they're all dressed to the nines in formal wear. And so every Star Wars movie has some kind of little like restaurant, diner, pub, some kind of cantina that has all these bizarre characters that are playing instruments and dressed funny. Blah, blah. Every movie has one. And so the way he chose to use it in his story was at a formal casino. So you have all these bizarre clothes. So I got to hear the conversation, because they tape it, between Ryan and the costume director as he was kind of casting the vision for this. And he's like, I wouldn't even know where to start to do formal wear for random aliens. Like, how do I make it even feel Star Wars? So he's asking the kinds of questions I'm saying here that a designer begins to consider if they're doing costume design. Is how do I design something that has the look and the feel of these characters and of this place? How do I use color? How do I use fabrics? How do I use movement? How do I put this together? So for older students, for those of you with older children that like to sew, doing something around a costume for a particular character or genre or movie is a fascinating way to get them to address design. They create a pattern with the directions, and then they have to write a little bit about why this particular costume is the correct creative expression for this character. What is it that links them? I think costume design is a great way to capitalize on sewing or leverage sewing for older students, because I think they have to consider the characters, and like I'm saying right here. So they could then do some writing about kind of a character analysis that leads to a particular kind of costume. And that's what I got to do for the camp musicals that I ran, is I go, how do I make the costume this person wears really represent that character and as an expression of who they are, the colors, everything. So you're taking sewing to a whole new level when you do something like costume design, but it's really fun. And the wider range of kinds of sewing that you can do is really cool. Okay, so this actually it's one type of like a design project, and you would use all of these. You could use all of these. Now, they don't have to actually write this down. Keep in mind, it is just communicating what I understand to an audience. So let's say instead they make a video. Well, everything that they say, and they're talking about, the pattern, they're going to create the pattern. The directions, I put the directions on the video. First, you're going to do this. You show yourself. You can even make the video as you're making the costume. So here's what we did first, and here's what you do second. It's like a how-to video. And then splice in little pieces of, or do this at the end, the character analysis. And what is it about the character that led you to this kind of costume or this kind of outfit or hat or piece? What is it that led you to that? You can show fabrics. You can even show yourself. Phones have video so easy now that when you're in the fabric store with your son or daughter and they go around and they're like, is this them? Is this them? I mean, you could have a lot of fun with making a video that represents all of this. So they're doing some thinking work that's character analysis. And then how does costume play into that? They're doing the thinking work of the directions, but maybe they don't actually hand write it out. Again, getting it to improving their writing, because you're improving their ability to communicate what they understand to someone else. All right, I'm going to end with that. If you have other ideas, I would love to have you share them, especially if you try something with your child and it works wonderfully. And if it works flop, please come share it with us and let's talk about. Okay, hold on. Okay, seems to me a good idea to just have theme setting and tone. Okay. I'm not really sure how to elaborate on this. So if you have any other comments to help me see where you're going with this, I think this is from you, Karen. If you could just give me a little bit more of what you're talking about, because I'd love to elaborate on this. All right, I'll give you a couple minutes. I won't close out just yet. But if you could put anything, elaborate on this for me so I can kind of dig into it deeper. Or an example. Thanks. Okay, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so even if you try something and it doesn't work so well, please come tell us about it and let's learn together from what didn't work. And it may just be that they tried to design something and it came out terrible. Like, I don't know if you remember a show that was very popular in the 80s. I think it was the late 80s, early 90s, Cosby Show. And in that first season, Denise, the older sister, says to Theo, her brother, look, I can make, it was Gordon Gartrell. It was a Gordon Gartrell shirt. And it was this popular type of men's shirt that at that time was like over $100. They were ridiculous. And so the sister says, oh, I can make one. And he goes, really, really? And so she gets nice fabric. She makes it and he goes to put it on and it's awful. Like the collar doesn't match and this sleeve is gathered and this is not. This one's super long. This one's short and it's long. I mean, it just looks terrible. And you can see him like, that's probably one of my favorite scenes out of that show. And they don't crack a smile. The actors did a really good job. But they're just like, what? This is not a Gordon Gartrell. But the same idea that when you are designing something from scratch and don't have a pattern, frequently it comes out terrible. But there's so much we could even learn from that. And so that might even be an opportunity to talk with your child about, well, so what are the struggles with design? And what is it? So the arms don't fit. Well, maybe we need to do a little bit more research and understanding about how you do arms. And let's look at some patterns of how they do that. So if getting into design and designing clothes or costumes or things like that is something your child is interested in, then this is a good opportunity for them to try something totally from scratch, make a whole bunch of mistakes, and then talk together about, well, okay, so what do we need to learn? We need to learn how to do arms. We need to learn how to do buttonholes or how to line things up, or maybe the shirt for form looks great, but you used a striped fabric and it's just doesn't match up. So there's all sorts of things that you can even learn from trying design and failing miserably. So please share those with us too. All right, let me look at the comments here and see if I can see. Okay, so Karen is helping. She does a lot of narrative writing and actually did some costumes for me for something. And so she sees kind of the connection between these two. So she's pointing out that that setting, theme, and tone that involve the characters in a story can be explored through designing costumes. Other crafting too, but designing costumes. As you think about for example, colors, textures, lengths, yeah, everything artistic and design costumes and designing and clothes people wear could be considered artistic, communicates out something. So for example, if you want to set the tone that this person is very modest, then the kind of clothes she wears, her necklines, the fabrics she chooses, those are all going to reflect that. If you have a character that is like, they always portray the like sleazy guy as, you know, he's got on a velour pantsuit and glasses, right? So there are certain kinds of costumes and textures and colors that we associate with certain kinds of character. So you would have the chance to dig into a little bit of deeper of character analysis and tone of that person. And setting might dictate just time and period and where they're from. So are their clothes, are their outfits and costumes reflective of a particular cultural norm? Are they 80s American. So you have that's how setting can affect it. And colors, even with how they work with somebody else in a scene. And if they really like costume, if you get into this, let's say you start this, you've never done this before and you start it, and they start to show an interest. This can be something that you can really explore as you watch movies together or TV together and talk about this stuff. Talk about what it is about their costumes that help you feel a tone, sense a tone of a scene or of a character. And how do all of those things play out in these different pieces of content that you're watching? It will begin to build their foundation about understanding characters and theme in stories through the eyes of the costumes that they wear. And if this is an interest, then this is really important for them to begin to understand. And then once you have those conversations, maybe the task is, I want you to design one. And we're going to go to, I think Walmart now has fabric. A lot of your fabric stores have dollar bins or less expensive bins. So go into those, and instead of going to the expensive bolts and bolts of fabric, and let's find some different textures and pieces. I know I did the musical I had a lot of fun with the textures of the fabric. And so I made these, it was kind of medieval setting. And so I got really inexpensive leather that they had in the dog bin, and I made these armbands. And then I put all these like brass rivets in them, and they laced up here, and they really they added a certain authentic feel to these are knights, and they're in the medieval times. And so if you begin to observe movies and TV and talk about in those settings, those how costumes play a role, and fabric and tones and colors and all that, then he or she can begin to go, okay, I'm liking this. I'm seeing some patterns. I see what I would do here and there. Okay, now your task, your homeschool assignment is going to be to design a costume for so-and-so. Or let her pick. You're going to pick a character. We've really loved this genre together, so pick a character, and you're going to make a costume for him or her that would fit you or fit, your sister or fit me, but you're going to make it from all the discussion that we had here about how all that plays out. So thank you, Karen. That's great. There's and costume play. Yeah. I think sometimes that we overlook costuming unless it's period pieces that we're watching, historical fiction or futuristic. Then all of a sudden costumes pop. When we're watching just something that's set in kind of the same time period as that I'm living, I don't think of what those people are wearing as costumes, but there's a costumer on every TV show and every film, and they have done a character analysis themselves before pulling together what this person is going to wear. And so if that's a direction, if sewing is something that your child likes, start with some patterns, try something design. If they're younger, try something designed for a doll. If they're really good at it, start to put that stuff online. A little girl I was working with, she did some design stuff, and she wrote to the people who made the doll and said that she had designed some clothes, and they actually contacted her, and they did a whole piece on her and showed the clothes that she wore, and one of her dresses they were going to make in their line. It was a huge deal. So if they're enjoying this, then run with it. Let them design things and understand how to communicate what they understand and to others about what they've designed. Yeah, okay, so now I'm rattling. But anyway, thank you, Karen, for pointing that out so I could add that to this. But I think it's very true. We watch so many things, and it contributes to the theme. It contributes to the overall feel of what I'm watching. And so to better understand that before I go designing something, if that's of interest to me, then, you know, wow, that can really be some great education and time to talk about some of the narrative elements, narrative writing, and bringing that into an area I really love, which is sewing. With that, I'm going to close. Thank you for joining me tonight. It's always, always exciting to share with you about how we make homeschooling more exciting for our kids, more connected to who they are, because it's when we bring learning into their world that we begin to awaken our learners. And that's what I'm all about. I know that's what you want to be all about. So have a great Thursday night, Friday if you're watching the replay, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.